In 1972, Russell R. Wassendorf, a futures trader in Cedar Falls, Iowa, begins hosting seminars and educational programs for commodity firms and introduces the technical driven Wassendorf trading system. The system provided recommendations for trading in the futures markets and was updated daily. The following statement is taken from PFGbest, Peregrine Financial Group's homepage, and explains with Wassendorf's words what PFGbest is all about. PFGbest focuses on sustainable investing for long-term probability of success for customers by offering a diverse suite of trading technologies, products and services, with an emphasis on low barrier to entry opportunities. It is one of the largest non-clearing US futures commission merchants with customers, affiliates and brokerage offices in more than 18 countries. Now you may be wondering what futures contracts is all about. So now we will show you an example that hopefully will answer your questions.
A futures contract can protect producers and suppliers from price changes. Al's Ice Cream buys milk from Tim's Dairy to make its ice cream. The price is $2 per gallon. At this price, Tim profits from the milk it sells, and Al's profits on every ice cream cone it sells. One day, a new dairy opens and the number of cows doubles. The extra milk pushes the price of milk down to $1 a gallon. Al's is making more profit as costs drop, but Tim's is losing money. Later, a sleeping sickness knocks out 3/4 of all the cows. Milk rises to $4, and Al's profit per ice cream disappears. Both companies want to avoid this price volatility. They both meet with an investor. Each company negotiates a separate contract with the investor. For Tim's Dairy, the contract states that if the price of milk goes below $2, the investor agrees to pay the difference to Tim's. If the price goes above $2, the investor gets to keep the profits. Al's contract with the investor works the opposite way. If the price of milk goes above $2, the investor pays the extra money and Al's gets milk at a predictable $2. If the price dips below $2, Al still pays $2 and the investor collects the profits. By locking in the price of milk, a futures contract allows both Al's and Tim's to transfer their potential risks and rewards onto the investor.
PFGbest has since April 2009 won a total of 10 awards. The last in 2011, where the company was named as one of the top 50 brokers by Futures magazine. This was the 13th consecutive year PFGbest ranked in this group. So everything indicates that it has went excellent for PFGbest and that the company must be very reliable.
The 9th of July 2012, Peregrine Financial Group CEO Russell Wassendorf Sr. committed suicide, but failed. After a long period of cheating and frauding, the guilt and the constant pressure from the regulators made Wassendorf collapse. But as well as he couldn't make a success out of PFGbest, he couldn't make a success out of his suicide. On July 13, FBI agents arrested Wassendorf at the Iowa City Hospital, where he has been healing since his suicide attempt. He admitted responsibility for the fraud that led to the loss in customer funds at his firm, in a suicide note that his son found in his car Monday. In the note, Wassendorf Sr. says that the fraud went undetected for 20 years. Through a scheme of using false bank statements, I have been able to embezzle millions of dollars from customer accounts, the note reads. In late September, Wassendorf pleaded guilty to mail fraud, lying to regulators, and embezzling customer funds. Crimes that could put him in jail for 50 years. After admitting that he was responsible for the fraud, regulators have found only $181 million of an estimated $400 million in customer funds PFGbest was supposed to have on hand. The regulators are still trying to track down the $219 million that were missing in customer funds, money that probably never will be found. The scandal has been compared to the big MF Global scandal in October 2011. Both companies were dealing with futures, and both companies went bankrupt, taking millions of customer money with them. The world is still wondering how PFGbest could get away with a fraud like this for 20 years. And here comes the causes.
A boy from a broken home started a business in the back room of a barber shop before setting out to the big city. He strikes it rich and returns years later to local glory, spending lavishly and savoring his role as a big man in a little town. In his suicide note, he explains that he already, a short time after the company was founded, began taking money from customer funds to run the business. It started in the winter of 1993 after a routine audit, when a Commodity Futures Trading Commission investigator named Robert Agnew began inquiring into a possible violation of rules on how Peregrine was investing customers' money, something that took Wasendorf by surprise, he wrote in his letter. What specifically caught Agnew's attention is known. Agnew and his team then conducted 6 audits over 5 months until they last found a technical fault, so PFG had to come up with a lot of capital.
He wrote in his suicide letter, "I had no access to additional capital and I was forced into a difficult decision. Should I go out of business or cheat? I guess my ego was too big to admit failure, so I cheated. I falsified the very core of the financial documents of PFG, the bank statements." He has later stated that the very high standards he had to meet from the CFTC and NFA was what made him cheat in the first place. For 20 years, he then took money from customer funds to pay fees, which he from time to time got a lot of, especially from the NFA. The company neither denied nor accepted, just paid the fees and moved on. He had always kept his company with as little electronic as possible, and also the audits were done analog. This was one of the reasons he could keep it up for so long, and why no one noticed the fraud.
In 2006, Wasendorf rented a P.O. box that he named something that would make it seem like it was an actual bank account, like US Bank and then some number. Wasendorf began forging monthly bank statements that Peregrine received from the US Bank for an account it held there, and replacing the bank's real return address with the address of Box 706. The aim, according to his plea agreement, was to deceive auditors into believing that P.O. Box 706 was the US Bank's mailing address. When the regulator then sent requests to the US Bank to verify the funds held in Peregrine's accounts, Wasendorf simply picked up the letters from Box 706, forged the bank statements, and sent them to the regulator with the P.O. Box as the return address. This made it seem like the bank verified the balance of the account that Wasendorf had reported, but actually it was Wasendorf verifying what he had said himself. The regulators doesn't appear to have recognized anything. In spite of all this, Wasendorf always tried to come up with new ways to make money by buying and running restaurants, opening magazines, and so on, so he could repay the customer money that he had taken. But when the financial crisis struck in 2008-2009, all hope of doing this disappeared. On top of that, the market economy made it very hard for the futures business and also PFG to keep a healthy company running. In the first half of 2012, there was some noticeable downscaling in PFG, but on the outside, Wasendorf's friend says he never seemed like something was wrong. A week before his suicide attempt, he was drinking beer with a friend on the terrace of his mansion and got married in Vegas. He also signed over power of attorney to his son without the son's knowing a couple of months before his suicide attempt. Through 2012, MF Global, another futures broker company, went bankrupt, and the regulators were now contacting Wasendorf to conduct the annual audit. Only this time, they wanted it done electronically to avoid another MF Global scandal. One day before his suicide attempt, he gives in to the NFA and delivers information electronically, and they then discover his fraud. The next morning, he was found lifeless in his car in the parking lot of the new building in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a suicide note in which he confesses everything to his wife, son, and everyone.
So, what was the consequences of the PFG scandal? The scandal of PFGbest did not only mean that a man probably gets put in jail for the rest of his life, and a lot of customers lost a lot of money, it also meant that the entire futures industry shook. The trust of the investors that the brokerage firms were able to handle the money in the right way was seriously reduced. Right now, the people doing business in the futures markets have two big examples of what happens when the firm you trust with your business isn't worthy of that trust. The fallout of the Peregrine scandal on the futures industry could be significant. It's the last thing the authorities in the futures industry need after spending the last 6 to 8 months in the shadow of the MF Global scandal. And the regulators, the auditors, and the authorities, especially the NFA, have been seriously criticized for falling asleep on the job. The fact that this is outright fraud gets at the heart of the whole confidence in the futures trading systems. So the consequences of this scandal were many. A man in jail, a whole industry shaking, critique of authorities, but actually also good came from these two scandals. The authorities, the NFA and the CFTC especially, have tightened the rules and verification protocols to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
The question is whether the scandal could have been avoided or not. The answer is pretty simple. It could. Basically, the whole PFG scandal would have been avoided with existence of more rules in the first place. The fact that the broker managed to fake its financial statistics and bank statements meant that the NFA, National Futures Association, wasn't able to early detect the wrongdoing of the company.
Such needed rules was recently presented by the CFTC, Commodity Futures Trading Commission's chairman, Gary Gensler, who appeared before the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture. Gary Gensler expressed the CFTC's wishes for the new reforms the organization had proposed in order to ensure a better protection for retail traders and investors. One of the biggest changes requested by the CFTC was that from now on, brokers should be obliged to keep enough funds separated in special accounts to be able to meet customer obligations at any moment. Another rule suggested by the CFTC is to always monitor traders' funds in segregated accounts and keep written records of excess funds in these accounts. Withdrawals of more than 25% of excess funds will have to be approved in advance and will have to be reported to the NFA. Regulated brokers will also be obliged to make additional reports to the NFA regarding the daily movements on segregated funds, as well as 2 additional reports per month regarding cash deposits and investments made by customers. The CFTC would also like to receive direct electronic access to the information related to customers' funds. At this moment, the only way to verify this data is through written statements submitted to the CFTC and to the NFA by brokers. An additional transparency rule should also be implemented that will allow traders to check the information about how their funds are being used and held by brokers. The CFTC would also like to establish new guidelines regarding how brokers manage customer funds in order to avoid future abuses. The mentioned suggestions presented by the CFTC are sufficient enough to solve these issues, and if they are adopted, it would enhance player protection and avoid any future cases, such as the PFGbest scandal.